thousands, and we'll grow in number, fueled by them to see the horizon, turn us to thousands. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways. And on we'll go.
Fill me out with your smile. Now the sunshine brings the light. Fill me out with a flame. I will let you in this game. Take me out when I'm down. 'Cause with you I'm safe and sound. 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 I'm safe and take me out when I'm down. 'Cause with you I'm safe and sound. 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 I'm safe and sound.
I give in to the lesser fight. My body aches to be satisfied. My weakness comes and goes. My weakness comes and goes. I'm reaching out for the easy high. Please fortify this strength of mine. My weakness comes and goes. My weakness comes and goes. specified. My body aches to be satisfied. My weakness comes and goes. My weakness comes and goes. I'm reaching out for the easy high. Please fortify this strength of mine. My weakness comes and goes. My weakness comes and goes. Weakness comes and goes, it goes, it goes. My weakness echoes in my soul. Oh, it echoes in my soul. My weakness comes and goes, it goes, it goes.
Good afternoon, Bangkok, and welcome to the third in our series for the Global Packaging Forum for ProPack Asia. If I may take you back to, excuse me, Monday, where we had a great session with Professor Pierre Pienaar, President of the World Packaging Association, also Henki Wibka from the Indonesian Packaging Federation. We got to talk about how to achieve global and regional packaging targets for ASEAN. So we set that overall framework for the start of the week of what were the targets, and then we started to get into what were the steps we needed to take in order to reach those targets. So on Tuesday afternoon, we had quite an assortment from Australia, and we spoke about how to balance sustainable packaging and food waste. It's a really challenging topic. Now, as part of that overall plan, we're going to move on this evening to another level of the understanding to meet those overall targets. And we've got an excellent group of panelists here to speak to you this evening. Now, the first is Ultro Salia. He is the Vice President of Sustainability for the World Packaging Organization. He's also the President of the Finnish Packaging Federation. So this is all part of the Global Forum, ladies and gentlemen, and we're here to help you through the targets, help you how to design packaging for the future. So now I'd like to now hand over to Ultro to do the first presentation of the evening. And to you, ladies and gentlemen, please start logging your questions on the program, because the first ones who log their questions in the Q&A section, they're the ones we're going to ask first. So please don't miss out. Okay, Ultro, over to you for the first presentation.
Thank you very much, Ralph. It's a great pleasure being here. And I wish you all a wonderful panel and then a seminar from Finland, where we have actually the first snow this morning. Just start sharing my screen and we'll get along with my presentation. So the topic of my presentation is challenges and opportunities of packaging in circular economy, and the case European Union is what we are talking about. I hope we can. So the world is facing huge societal challenges at the moment. Just to mention some: climate change, population growth, pollution, globalization, aging population, metropolization, and scarcity of critical raw materials. And on top of everything else, we have now also the COVID-19. So we really do have big challenges. Most of us agree that what we have to do in order to fight not COVID, but other, let's say, related to raw materials and economy, the challenges, I mean. So we have to move from linear to circular economy. And linear economy meaning that we use raw materials, we dig them out from the ground or cut trees or produce them in other ways. And through production and use, we then end up with non-recyclable waste, meaning dumps. We have to go into reuse economy, where we are more or less today, where raw materials after production and use are being recycled at least to a certain degree. And we produce less and less non-recyclable waste. But the real target and objective is a circular economy, where raw materials become an endless loop, where production is followed by use, followed by recycling, and then another production cycle. And this is the way we can live in the future, and also the generations to come can live with our natural resources. So what kind of role can packaging have in this kind of a world? Packaging has great potential to contribute to circular economy. The primary job of packaging is always to protect the packaged good. And that's why the most important thing is that packaging can contribute to reducing waste. And because most of the packaging in the world is being used for food packaging, the food waste reduction is one of the biggest objectives for packaging, as well as for the society. Secondly, packaging can be reused. We have quite many good examples of packaging that can be reused as such. And the packaging that cannot be used can, in most cases, be recycled. And finally, if the packaging cannot be recycled, high energy content packaging can be incinerated for energy after having been discarded. And only a very small fraction of packaging can be then not recycled after the use. And fifth, which is not insignificant, is that packaging can also play a significant role in reverse logistics, which is a really important part of the future circular economy. But there are also challenges when it comes to packaging and circular economy. We all have seen this kind of images in the media. Maybe less during the COVID-19 period, but before that, this was something that we saw almost every night on television or in the newspapers or in other medias. Packaging waste on a paradise beach, and maybe most importantly, plastic packaging waste. So I claim that the three biggest challenges of packaging in circular economy, number one is plastics, number two is plastics, and number three is also plastics. And this is dramatical because plastics are synthetic materials that man has created to answer the challenges or to meet the challenges that we have with the natural raw materials. Plastics are cheap, they are technically functional, and you can do almost everything with plastics. So it's very tragical that plastics have become such a big problem. But plastics are also a problem because our feelings have gone against plastics. And because we have a strong feeling that plastics are doing bad things in the society, also our political decision makers have targeted plastics in their policy actions. And I'll be going through a couple of things that European Union has decided to do in the coming years in order to reduce the harmful aspects of plastic packaging. In 2015, European Union introduced a circular economy package, abbreviated CEP, with two objectives which go hand in hand. The number one objective is to use resources in a smarter, more sustainable way by keeping them in use for as long as possible, extracting their maximum value and recovering and regenerating materials at the end of life. And the second objective is to boost global competitiveness, foster sustainable economic growth, and generate new jobs. Not easy things to do together. An important element of the CEP is an action plan. An important element in the action plan is the plastic strategy, which was introduced in 2017. According to the plastic strategy, by 2030, all plastics in Europe are either reusable or can be recyclable in a cost-effective manner. And by the same year, 2030, more than 50% of the plastic waste is really being recycled. And that means that by the same year, sorting and recycling capacity must be increased fourfold. And also at the same time, which is maybe the most important thing, is that demand for recycled plastics in Europe must grow at the same time. So the objective is to ensure 10 million tons of recycled plastics by 2025. Alongside with the plastic strategy, there is something called the Single-Use Plastics Directive, which is based on studies carried out on marine waste on European beaches. And here on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the most common single-use plastics item found on European beaches. About half of them are more or less packaging. So this is something that the European Union is targeting with the Single-Use Plastics Directive, which has been introduced 2019. The new European Commission that started its work this year introduced as its first job a new political instrument, which is called the European Green Deal. And this is a very vast program which covers almost everything in the economy. And it also has this double meaning that the CEP was carrying. It is bringing us to a circular economy, and at the same time, it is really bringing Europe into a zero pollution continent. In short, EU circular economy package and packaging, the implications are as follows. Circular economy package increases recycling. Recycling targets go up from 50 to 70%, and plastics from 22.5 to 55%. Single-use plastics directive reduces plastic waste and also the impact of plastic waste on nature. It bans certain single-use plastics. It increases use of recycled material. It extends producer responsibility and sets rules for green claims. And then finally, Green Deal reduces the total environmental impact, increases reusable packaging, and brings also visible the packaging's positive role in decreasing food waste. EPR, which stands for Extended Producer Responsibility, has a big role, and the role is even increasing in the future. And in short, EPR means that those who bring the packaged goods to market are also responsible for the recycling and reuse of the material. In Europe, EPR is playing a big role, and I think that in developing world, it can play even a bigger role with the big multinational companies being responsible for also waste management. Before the COVID-19 popped up in Europe and in most of the world, packaging and plastic packaging were really being blamed for destroying the planet and not creating a future. And since April, actually, the tide has turned, and this has created an opportunity for packaging and for plastic packaging. And this is an opportunity we should also use, even though this is kind of a joke, the whole cartoon. With these words, I'd like to end my presentation with a photo of my home country, Finland, where it looked like this a week ago, and early this morning, we already had our first centimeter of snow. But thank you very much for your attention, and I'll end my presentation here and let the word back to Ralph. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and a beautiful photo. Thank you for sharing that with us, Albert. It's a very long distance from lockdown Melbourne, where I live, but thank you very much. That's charming. Ladies and gentlemen, all part of the process after a great introduction there from Altro into this evening's program. I now want to move across to Pippa Corey and her presentation. Now, if you look through Pippa's details, she is an out-and-out classic designer and one of Australia's leading packaging designers, and we're really trying hard to keep her to stay here too, by the way. That's just a secret I thought I'd share with some of my nearest and dearest around the world. But she's really charming, but she's really smart, and that's the key thing. Don't be deceived by her charm. She's a really good operator, and there's a lot to learn from what Pippa's got to say tonight. So may I really encourage you, get on your keyboards there and get some really pertinent questions ready for Pippa in the Q&A session at the end. Pippa, after that introduction, I've got to hand over to you. Thank you.
So kind. Thank you, Ralph. Bear with me one moment while I share my screen, which will initially be what looks like me surfing, but I can't claim to be enjoying the ocean. So hopefully you can see my screen all okay. Ralph, shout obviously if you can't. So thank you for having me this evening. It's great to be here, and thank you, Antro, for such a great kickoff to the session. So I'm really here to share some insights of how I really got to work in the world of circularity, and obviously talk through some key elements of circular design in particular, and highlight how that can create or play a really pivotal role in packaging fit for the future. So firstly, for me, this quote is something that really resonates with me for our journey ahead in transitioning to a circular economy. And it really highlights where we really need to start, which is our mindset and how we think and address problems in their entirety. So I've spent many years working in the design industry and now run a circular design consultancy based out here in Sydney. And my passion for sustainability and design really began when I was studying product design at university. From there, I've worked in the creative industry for a number of years, working in brand and packaging design agencies, and really learned through my experience at the time how little was being done to address packaging waste in particular, but also a number of the other externalities that I found the products that we were designing to be having an impact on the environment, which really led me on a journey to try and find what solutions could be to alleviate that waste So I guess fast forward 10 years or so, working with some of the world's leading brand and design agencies, I'm now trying to galvanize this design community to really shift how we think and how we design. So I'm a member of the Australian Institute of Packaging, so probably why I'm here this evening, and a certified consultant of Circulab. And we're a group of growing consultants around the world, and our role is to really facilitate the design of circular and resilient business models and products. And so my work really focuses on collaboration, which is a really key element to achieving the circular economy. And I work really closely with design agencies, but also directly with brands here in Australia and globally around the world as well. And really, from my experience working in this industry, I've really tailored the offer to identify the areas needed to transition to circular economy. So that captures everything from education and team training, all the way through to consulting and organisations, business and packaging strategies. And this is really my why. This is what gets me out of bed, I guess, in the morning. And I want us to zoom right out from packaging, which is why we're here today, obviously, but look at this collectively, where we're currently sitting within our planet. So for those of you who haven't heard of the donut model or donut economics, it's a principle devised by the economist Kate Raworth, who is a wealth of inspiration and knowledge. And I would highly recommend her book if you're able to read it and gain that insight and information. But these visuals represent essentially where we sit today on the left, and on the right is our goal of where we really want to achieve globally. And in the middle of this hole, at the center of the donuts, reveals the proportion of people worldwide that are falling short on life's essentials. So that's anything from food, water, healthcare, and a big part of our role for humanity is to really get everyone out of that hole. And at the same time, we really need to ensure that we're no longer overshooting the donut's outer edge, which is the ecological limits of our planet. So really ensuring and safeguarding our life-giving systems, such as a stable climate, healthy oceans, and protective ozone. And these are fundamentally the ecosystems of which our very lives and the businesses in which we run operate on. And I think just to put some context to those overshoots, we know that about 45% of greenhouse gas emissions come from the production of everyday goods. And there in itself lies a really big opportunity if we're able to rethink how we're creating those products and services to mitigate that risk and take us out of these overshoot areas. But I guess the best news is we have the solutions readily available to us. It's about understanding, implementing, and circular design is certainly a key enabler of achieving those goals for us. And I guess to zoom then right back into our sector, this is the current state of play of how packaging is moving through our economy here in Australia. And what this really clearly shows are the material losses through the system in itself, and how such an abundance of waste will be contributing to those major environmental and social implications we saw on the previous slide. So there's significant loss and waste from a design perspective in terms of the packaging's materiality, its physical attributes, as well as the design of the whole system in itself. So in essence, we're losing material value, which comes at an economic loss, but also a significant cost to the environment and society. So touching back on, how we rethink this, I think that's a really key component to where we need to start from a circular economy. The butterfly diagram, if you've not seen this before, it's the visual representation of a circular economy. So Antro touched on obviously the models of linear to reuse to circularity. And what circularity really does is try to have a restorative and regenerative goal. So its key principles are to design out waste and pollution, keep resources in use for as long as possible, and regenerate natural systems. And it has two material cycles. So on the left are your natural or your biological nutrient cycles, and on the right is your industrial cycles. So that's anything that's essentially been man-made. But what this model aims to do is to build value from an economic perspective, while also having a positive impact on nature and, of course, the people within our societies. So the inner loops of this diagram, so where they're much smaller circles, is really our goal. That's what's going to help us achieve those and overcome those negative externalities and overshoots, and really keep materials at the highest possible value to provide the largest cost saving in terms of material, labour, energy and capital. So specific to our industry, within a circular economy, packaging has no beginning, middle or end of life, but it's a continual loop, and we really start rethinking that problem to get us further into those inner loop opportunities. And if we're making this necessary transition, for me, we need to make sure that we're not limited by the capacity of our existing system, which is predominantly still linear. And we need to create a really compelling story for the future and what the circular economy can bring to our businesses, but also to ourselves within the societies and countries in which we live. So for me, it's the very problems that we see within the linear economy that are almost our brief to create the solutions for the future of packing for the circular economy. So we've established to achieve a circular economy, we first need to really be open to new mindsets and new ideas and really challenge our traditional model. We also need to ensure that we're having the greatest impact possible. So we need to have strategies embedded at the heart of an organisation. And there are 5 key business models to a circular economy, all of which that look to narrow the use of resources, slow down their use and close the loops and regenerate. And the benefits of these models all look to provide cost savings for the businesses. They provide great flexibility and adaptability to individual user needs. It allows the opportunity to really build really strong brand loyalty and improve the user experience, as you've got detailed intelligence and insights which are continually fed back through the models in which they are built. And of course, what sits at the heart of those business models is circular design. And what this really shows us is our biggest opportunity for impact sits when we are designing and creating a circular economy. So up to about 80% of environmental impacts of a product or service or packaging design are defined in those very early design stages. So the decisions that we're making at that moment dictate a vast number of environmental impacts. And it's obviously really difficult to go back and undo those effects if we later find out that it's causing negative impacts. So it's really, really important we're considering that at a brand or ideally at a business level, which would obviously encompass our packaging solution. So packaging is a really, really important component to a much bigger story for an organisation. And circular design effectively combines kind of 3 key elements. So human-centered design, systems thinking, and life cycle thinking. So the human-centered element puts people at the heart of the problem that we're looking to resolve. And it really allows us to immerse ourselves in the world of the people that we would be designing for and get a really deep understanding of what they need to bring those solutions to life. Systems thinking is a bit of a messy, complex way to work through things, but it's really, really critical. You know, our world is built on systems, and we really need to be able to embrace and understand their interconnectedness, so we can design and ensure that, you know, one decision isn't having a knock-on or negative impact elsewhere in the system. And obviously from a life cycle perspective, you know, acknowledging that we want to work towards those inner loops from the butterfly diagram. How can we design for a closed loop of resources? And we need to make sure that whatever we're using from a packaging material perspective, we've got an existing broad scale infrastructure to process and manage those materials. And at Philo, we use a number of tools to help clients work through the process of transitioning from linear towards circular models. But the Circular Canvas is a tool that's been really helpful to us to understand how an organisation is creating and delivering value, identify and anticipate some potential impacts, and really take a step back in order to have that really holistic view that we need to have across the whole packaging system. But it's essentially a framework and methodology that puts circular design at the heart of any decision that we're making. So it makes sure that we're being progressive, we're being regenerative, and we're managing any risks or negativities that could come in to cause issues for the business. So it can correspond at a business level, or we could take it right down to a packaging design approach in itself. But what this really is great at doing is, you know, having that system view, but an ability to overlay an evidence-based case study afterwards, or a life cycle assessment, to really validate any decisions that we make before we proceed to implementing them. So really quickly, just to go through how this model works. We start with the mission, so the why, which is coming back to that human element. So what is the basic need that we're looking to solve through this brief? And what are the key activities and partners and human resources that we'll need in order to achieve that activity? And what are the resources that we're going to need from a natural, a technical, or an energy perspective? And do we need to redesign the user experience to create a higher value for the customer and for stakeholders involved? And then we go through and look at, you know, how we sell this product and distribute it all the way through to what the next life or the after use opportunities for the product or packaging component. And once we've done that, we're able to then see, you know, what are the positive and negative impacts these decisions are collectively having on our planet and our people, and also evaluate the feasibility. So what are the potential cost barriers, or what could be the potential revenue streams for materials that we're using in that system. So I thought it'd be good to share some real case examples of how circular design is coming to life. And while these examples aren't a result of using that CircuLab tool, they certainly encompass the methodology, the business models, and of course the objectives. So Garçon Wines is a great case study from Europe, and actually I read in Packaging News this morning that it's coming to Australia, which is very exciting. But circularity has been core to the whole business model and design of this product. And the bottle and outer packaging is actually designed to fit through a letterbox. So they calculated the carbon emissions of missed deliveries from direct to consumer sales of wine, and really wanted to address that to make sure that it was addressing customer convenience, but also really rethinking the materials that they're using and the recoverability of them. And again, a really critical component is, you know, what is the quantifiable data that gives us the ability to know that this is an improved decision versus a traditional model. So they obviously did extensive work to look at you know, the measures and how that's tracked and traced through their packaging system. And Loop is another great global example, and again, very lucky that this is coming to Australia next year, but a really great example of the power of those inner loops of the butterfly diagram. So designed in a way that they're really extending the product life of packaging components, but also providing the packaging as a service. So it's really rethinking ownership altogether. And their goal is to achieve zero waste consumerism. And again, the numbers really speak for themselves. So that reuse element has enabled them by 10 uses of one item of packaging to reduce the environmental impacts by about 35%. So it's really, you know, it's a really strong argument to transitioning to those circular models. And I think for me, you know, when this comes through from a communication perspective, at a very basic level, any packaging for the future needs to know what resources we're using, where they're coming from, and whether they're recoverable in the markets that they're used in, and having really clear on-pack communication to help customers understand where they should appropriately place those materials once they've used, if they're not being reused and they're going into recycling. But obviously, as we're talking here today about packaging for the future, I think we really need to be mindful of what the bigger opportunity is here and where that packaging sits in part of that bigger story. We're seeing a huge shift globally in terms of what's being communicated on packaging to achieve true circularity, but also the bigger conversation around, you know, climate impact and traceability of ingredients is coming across really strongly through the design system. So L'Oreal is a great example. They've designed their own digital labeling system that scores the environmental and social impact of a product, which obviously features the packaging component in there as well. So what can we do to initiate circular design? I think for me, the main thing is challenging the brief, challenging the problem. You know, we really need to start having these conversations much earlier on. And I really want people to be able to take away where that bigger opportunity sits. So if we can rethink the problem and not be confined by our current linear system, you know, there's a number of people that we can collaborate with and work together to find and design the solutions that will get us there. So that's me. So thank you very much for listening. Please feel free to reach out for me after the presentation if you've got any questions or want to talk more. I'd be happy to chat with you.
Thank you. That was fantastic, Pippa. Thank you so much for that. So here's the sequence of the evening, ladies and gentlemen. We've got the principles of world sustainability. We've now talked to a designer. Now we're looking for a brand owner, and we're looking for someone who is really familiar with reusable packaging. This brand is familiar to all of us globally, and the core of their business, as far as I'm concerned, is reusable packaging. So who better to speak about it but the Vice President Global R&D for Tupperware. So this afternoon we have David Kusuma with us. So before I hand over to David, may I please remind you, let's get those questions going into the Q&A box for either for Pippa or for David or for Alto or for Alan, who will come soon afterwards. So get those questions in, ladies and gentlemen. David, we're really looking forward to your presentation. Over to you now.
So thank you very much, Ralph. I'm very pleased to be here. It's a pleasure to join the dialogue about circular design and circular economy. So my responsibility at Tupperware is I'm head of global product R&D, and my role is to bring in new materials and new technologies, you know, as we develop our products of the future. But my other role is to also be responsible for life cycle assessment. So my team is focused on making sure that we understand the impact of our products, you know, as we are launching them worldwide. Our headquarters is based in Orlando, Florida, but we are present in over 100 countries around the world. The important aspect, you know, for us to keep track of is that we launch between 150 to 200 new products every year. So it's a lot of products that we put out, you know, and it's important that we do understand the impact of the environment that our products are putting out. So I want to discuss some work that we've been working on in this area, and also to talk about some opportunities as we go on. First of all, I am also, actually Tupperware is also a member of the World Design Organization. I happen to be on the board. So we are guided as well by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And out of the 17, you know, there are 7 that the WDO, the World Design Organization membership, has selected as being primary in terms of where they believe that industrial design can actually have a big effect in terms of impact in these 7 areas. This presentation is focused primarily on 3 of them. 9, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. 12, which is responsible consumption and production. And 17, which looks at partnerships, how you tie everything together. So one of the things that we pay attention to is the Global Footprint Network. This is an organization that keeps track on the health of the planet. Looking at the planet's capability to recover from overconsumption and overproduction. what this organization is telling us is that we're already behind the 8 ball. You know, if we continue progressing in the way that we've been progressing over the last decade or two, by the year 2050, we will need 2.3 Earths in order to continue to produce and consume what we've been consuming. So it's pretty dramatic. There are 2 areas I would really like to cover in detail. One is looking at building sustainable futures, looking at food waste, and then I want to get a little bit into the aspect of design afterwards. You know, what designers and what engineers, product developers can actually do in this area to make a difference. So the first one is looking at food waste. You know, if we allow our consumers to focus on, you know, how do they save food by allowing food to last longer. You know, we give them 3 basic things that are very important to them. Number 1, it helps them to save money. Number 2, it keeps food out of the waste stream. And so by doing that, number 3, we are also reduce the greenhouse gases coming from spoiling food. So we take a lot of our motivations from real world problems. You know, if you take a look at this photo, 1.3 billion tons of food are wasted worldwide every year. It's an enormous amount of food, you know, especially considering how many people out in the world have lack of access to, you know, food on an everyday basis. One of the products that we have launched about a decade ago, you know, as we started to look at the category or the focus on food conservation, was this type of container where we worked with a number of universities. In the US, most of the well-known agricultural universities are what we call land-grant universities. You know, these are universities that accept a lot of money and they accept a lot of land from the government to focus on specifically the science and the engineering of agriculture. So we've worked with a number of them, you know, and it's very amazing that, you know, based on the research, a lot of them have come to the same conclusions, which is that when we're looking at fruits and vegetables, you know, many people think that if they store them the same way that they would store, you know, their other food in the kitchen, you know, canned goods, dry foods, and so on, you know, that they would get the same effect in terms of conservation, but it's not true. When you are putting in plants that are harvested, you know, either vegetables or fruits, if you take into consideration that these food commodities are actually still alive and you treat them, you know, as if they are alive, and you allow the food, the product that you're putting in here, to continue to respirate, to continue to breathe and exchange the carbon dioxide and the ethylene gas on the inside of the container with oxygen on the outside, you can get a really net positive benefit. You know, so everything here boils down into the size of openings. You know, we want to keep a high level of moisture because we don't want the food to dry out, but we also want to avoid any kind of condensation, you know, any kind of what we call free water accumulation, because that brings bacteria, it brings pathogenic activity. And what we've done here, if you take a look at the chart, is that we've organized all of the fruits and the vegetables into basically 3 categories. They're either high breathers, you know, they have high respiration rates, which means they need to have a high exchange with oxygen on a regular basis. Then there's low breathers, you know, food commodities that don't need a lot of exchange. And then there's that whole middle ground. So the container is actually designed so that the user can customize their experience. They can customize the use of their product just by changing and sliding this little slider that basically hides a couple holes on the bottom. And depending on whether you are a high breather, you know, you would push it to one side. You know, a low breather, you'd push it to the other side, and then you know, the third position is in the middle ground. The interesting thing about this is that, you know, based on the type of fruits or vegetables that you're trying to store, you can actually end up with 2 to 4 weeks longer use of your food commodities. So over here, you can see that, you know, different users would utilize them for different types of fruits and vegetables. Basically, they can customize their experience however they feel like, you know, whatever their preference is. The next one is cheeses. You know, I always get a little bit of teasing from our European counterparts because they tell me that in the US, we have actually no real cheese. You know, in Europe, they have cheeses that are very high in moisture. They have, you know, a lot of flavor, and some of them are very pungent. But they used to have a real problem, you know, in terms of spoilage, because, you know, cheese is a very expensive commodity. It's an expensive food. If you don't store it in the right conditions, what happens, you know, especially in countries like France, parts of Germany, where they consume an enormous amount of cheese. You know, in fact, some of their cuisine, as you know, is specifically focused on ending their meal with cheese. You know, some of them skip their dessert and then they would take cheese and fruits at the end of their meal. One of the problems was, you know, storing the cheese in the refrigerator. The cheese would condensate, you know, it would evaporate, it would condensate at the top and basically drip back down on the cheese, which would make it very unappetizing just after a few days. So here we worked with an external company focused on developing a special membrane that allowed us to vent external or rather excess moisture from inside of the container to the outside of the container. And it uses just really a simple physics principle. You know, generally speaking, we're moving moisture from an area of high vapor pressure to an area of low vapor pressure. It's always the highest inside the container because that's where evaporation is taking place. So this has become, you know, one of our top selling items in Europe because, you know, that's where a lot of cheese is consumed. And then the third example I want to give you is bread conservation. You know, we've also done a lot of work with conserving breads. Breads we found to be a very, very difficult challenge because depending on where you come from and what country you know you're in, the types of breads are very, very different. You know, in Germany, they tend to have breads that are much higher in density. In France, just across the border, you know, they would have, for example, the baguette, where you have kind of a harder skin, but you have a nice flaky, airy consistency on the inside of the bread. You know, consumers, they don't care about, you know, trying to make distinctions between them. They just want the product to work. You know, so we had to do a lot of work to dial this in, but this worked on the same principle. We had to make sure that there was enough moisture in there so that the bread would not go dry, it wouldn't go stale. But we also wanted to make sure that, you know, we were able to vent enough of the moisture out so that the breads wouldn't get moldy either. So now I want to shift our mindset into designing products. You know, and this is really the topic of today, which is to try to avoid plastic waste and pollution. A lot of the LCA that we work on actually point, you know, to the consumer part of the life cycle assessment. You know, we can actually make some difference when we're manufacturing the product. But the biggest savings comes when the user actually takes ownership of the product, because you know, we've taught our consumers that if they wash their housewares in cold water versus in hot water, immediately they can cut down their carbon footprint in half. You know, it's amazing. It doesn't take much. It just takes good design and good education for the people who use our products. So at Tupperware, we always have an issue with post-consumer waste. You know, all of our products are sold with a lifetime warranty, which means we're obligated to take them back if anything happens, to them from a functional point of view, or the consumer's not happy about them. Then what do we do with it? The issue is that we can't just take a post-consumer product, regrind it, and reuse the material, because all of our products that we normally sell are focused on a direct contact with food. So the material has to be certified for direct food contact. And we don't know what the consumer has actually done with these products. We don't know whether they use them for food or whether they ended up using them in their garage, putting in nuts and bolts, for example. We've come up in that process with a new line of products called Recycline, where we can take the material, clean it a little bit, recycle it, and then turn it into products that are actually not connected to food. So here you can see a few of them, things like the paper towel holders. We have what we call a place for seals. We have a bottle holder and a squeegee, but there are more products than this. The idea is just, to conceptualize how can we develop products that are of benefit to consumers that don't need to enter or re-enter the food cycle. Those of you who have been around for a long time in product development, or who have connected to products, probably know this term, DFMA. It first started as DFM, which is Design for Manufacturing, and also DFA, Design for Assembly. And suddenly the acronyms got combined, Design for Manufacturing and Assembly. So this is still being practiced today. No issue with that. The one that seems to have gotten forgotten a little bit, and this is where product designers really have to come back, is this whole area of DFD, which is Design for Disassembly. If we want to take a product at the end of its life cycle and we want to reutilize the materials and turn it into something else and give it a second life, we have to make sure that the components of our product can be disassembled so that we can separate the materials, and then we can recycle them responsibly. I like to show this picture of toothbrushes because it always astounds me whenever I go to a drugstore, to get a new toothbrush. These toothbrushes are becoming so elegant. They've got 7 or 8 different materials, some of them on them, from the rigid to the bristles to the soft touch of the handle, to try to give the user a good experience. But what we've forgotten is that none of these materials, the way that we've made them, are separable, so you can't take them apart, which means that these toothbrushes, cannot be separated. And, considering all of the millions of toothbrushes that are sold, every year, it's just a huge waste problem. Because there's nothing you can do. I guess you could find a way to downcycle them, but it's a good example of how designers have to take a much more responsible role in handling the products that we design, so that they can be disassembled and recycled at the end of use. Some of the things that we've worked on in R&D. If you take materials that come from different sources, they're all colored differently because each market wants their own color, and you combine them, what do you get? You often get a very bland looking product. It's normally brown in base color because you've combined all the materials. But we've come up with a way to utilize, special pigments, and these special pigments actually melt at different temperatures, so you've got different colors that melt at different temperatures that allow you to get kind of these interesting streaking effects. It's interesting when I show these to people, they either love it or they hate it. If I show it to our quality people, they hate it because they're used to seeing things that are perfectly, part to part reproducible. One part is exactly the same as the last. But if I show this to, most of the everyday consumers who are looking, at lifestyle and, individualized living, they love it and there are many different colors that are available. I'm just showing you one that is quite dramatic with this kind of pink and yellow and white color added to it. So this is one way to get some visual interest into products that would otherwise be extremely boring. We played around with cellulose as well. So cellulose is what's left over when you're working with wood and some natural materials, but you take away all the wood fibers, you take away the lignin, and you basically end up with cellulose, which is kind of like a paper-like material. But the benefit of using that is, number one, it actually gives you better properties in terms of stiffness, and it also displaces the plastics, and it gives you different characteristics, So we played with this. We've tried to see how high of a level we could go, and then even printed some graphics. These were printed with Mexican graphics, thinking that it could be an interesting product for Latin America. Normally this type of product would be transparent because normally when you put food items into containers, people want to be able to see their food. But here, when we're using cellulose, that's not an option, so we tried to compensate by using interesting graphics. We've also worked with different wood products. This has been a real interesting introduction to the markets, and it tells a really good story, and we try to explain that, here we're not cutting down trees in order to make products. What we're doing is we're actually rescuing all of the leftover sawdust from lumber mills that would otherwise be thrown away. And we have the opportunity to take them. What we did was we compounded them into polymer materials because people still expect that their Tupperware lasts a long time. And even putting together a product that contained also some natural content, it still had to meet the expectation, of consumers in terms of longevity. There was a big issue that we had to work on relative to technology because, it is a natural material, wood, which means that when you put it in the dishwasher, personally, I wouldn't dishwash it, but, the standards of Tupperware says that everything has to be dishwashable. If you do put it in the dishwasher, it'll start to patina, it'll be like wood actually wears because it is a natural material, just as if you were to leave your wooden chair or your wooden table out on your patio during the summer. In the summer sun, in the summer rain, it would start to fade as well. But what we solved on this one was that, normally when it's exposed to a lot of water and moisture and sunlight, you get in a situation where the wood fibers like to stick out normal to the surface of the product, so it becomes kind of fuzzy. In this case, what we've done is we've worked on technology that basically took the wood fibers. We coated the fibers before we compounded them so that we could control the fibers. Now we don't have any of that kind of fuzzy effect, but the wood still does patina because it is a natural material. Again, some people love it, and some people don't like the color shift. So now we've been focused also on circular polymers. So circular polymers are different than post-consumer plastics that you bring back that you end up regrinding. Because here, you're actually taking the plastic material and you are chemically recycling it. So using a process of pyrolysis, that can break down the polymer into its original constituents, through temperature, through pressure. You can get back the original constituents, and what that allows you to do is to rebuild the polymer from the constituents, which would be the monomers. And so what you're essentially doing is you're building a new plastic out of old plastic products. So here, what we did was we first started out slow. We utilized this polymer from a company called Sabic, used to be called GE Plastics. I used to work for them as well years ago. And we started out with our reusable straws. So we have the straw, we have these pouches. The pouches are actually made of recycled PET bottles. and this gave people an opportunity to kind of bring their straws with them so that they wouldn't contribute, to the plastic waste as they went around and, purchased fast food, for example. And then we took the same idea and, a lot of people stop for their coffees in the morning, either at Starbucks or equivalent coffee outlets. Excuse me. And so we launched a set of coffee mugs, again, with this circular polymer material. So you can see that, they can be offered in all different colors, all different flavors, and for some of the younger crowd, we just kind of went, a little bit further and provided really super interesting graphics, to make it much more appealing. And then we launched a number of shopping bags as well. You can see that, these are made from recycled plastic bottles. Most of it is PET. And it just focuses on this whole area of reusability. Don't use the plastic bags in the supermarket. Bring your own and utilize what has been recycled and what has been taken out of the garbage stream. So I'd like to just close talking a little bit about some disruptive materials that are currently in development and which we are also currently evaluating as well. So first one is a material called air carbon by a company named Newlight. And it's really interesting because what they're doing is they are capturing carbon in order to make the polymer from pollution. So they've been tapping things like landfills to collect on the methane gas, capturing the carbon and then turning that back into a polymer. So the whole idea is that, you can actually remove carbon from the air. That's why they call it air carbon, and you can turn it into something useful. They've started already a relationship with IKEA, looking at, building new furniture based on this air carbon material. They've also built a relationship with The Body Shop. A lot of their products are single use. These are packaged in these, bottles. Now they have the opportunity to use air carbon for this as well. So, The Body Shop is looking at their whole strategy in terms of packaging, and how to employ materials such as these. And then there's a company called Lollyware that makes edible and biodegradable materials. Here you see a cup. It's made out of a material that comes from a seaweed. And the interesting thing about this is that after you utilize it, after you drink your food, your product, your drink in this case, you can actually consume it by eating it. It's one of the things that they promote. So it's really, interesting. These are all ways to take a look at your packaging from a different point of view. It already has a purpose or a use, after you get to the end of life. Just two statements I'd like to end with. The first one is a modern future. It can't live without materials and technologies. We all know that. But we need to make both of these, both technology and products, more sustainable for the coming generation, for people who come after us. And then the last one is something that we really believe in at Tupperware, and that is that tomorrow is always more important than today. So thank you very much for your time and your invitation.
Oh, it's been our pleasure, David. Thank you so much. I just draw your attention. Look, this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, we promised you circular and sustainable design, packaging for the future. I think even without getting to Alan's fantastic presentations coming, we are delivering it for you. I really hope some of the cutting edge and creative, and what I really liked about yours, David, the lateral thinking that was going on between materials that you wouldn't otherwise think of, how you process them in a different way to get quite an outstanding outcome that consumers desire. That's kind of like getting close to the Holy Grail. So congratulations there to Tupperware. But just to keep you honest, we've got Sealed Air coming up, and they've also got some really creative things for packaging for the future. So Alan, would you be so kind as to take over now? Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Ralph, and thanks for the invite. And it's fantastic to be on a panel with such interesting people, knowledgeable people, and making such a difference in the world. To follow David and Pepper, some amazing and exciting products there. I'm going to dip into probably some slightly more run-of-the-mill type products that we see on our shelves every day. So let's have a talk about what is going on from a circular and sustainable design perspective with some of the materials that really do a lot of heavy lifting for us in delivering the kind of lifestyles we have today. And in many ways, David and I have a lot in common here, because I will be talking a fair bit about the space specifically that Sealed Air is involved in, which is really around foods, and particularly foods that fresh produce and require protection, as well as perhaps some of the materials in e-commerce. So a bit of a focus in on some critical packaging and how we can make steps in a specific space looking at flexible plastics. So I think flexible plastics, while there are lots of alternative options and design strategies around for making better alternatives for many, many products, we still need flexible plastics. We see that as a not negotiable. David talked about the scale of food waste globally, the 1.3 billion tons of food waste generated annually, and the economic, the cost of that, the environmental cost. If food waste was a country, it'd be second only behind the US and China as a greenhouse gas emitter. And the social cost that David spoke about, where there's food insecurity all over the world, and yet we are wasting it like crazy. Packaging has a big part to play in helping get produce from where it's produced, where it's created, where it's farmed, to the end users that need it. And those supply chains are challenging. So we need to figure out, how do we take these very useful products that have a great functional capability and build them into a circular model? And I think that this is a space where we need true innovation. For decades, the packaging industry, the plastics industry, has incrementally improved things, and that's generated good outcomes for us. We've generated materials that can do the same jobs and more with less resources. But I think the time is upon us now where incremental improvement is not going to cut it. We need step change innovation to produce high performance materials that can still be generated with these high level of performance, high level of resource efficiency, but enable circular outcomes through recyclability and recovery. So there's the areas of innovation I see us working through and driving hard towards today, and we will see real meaningful change in, are around the space of designing materials that are capable and compatible with circular design infrastructure. We will see, and we need, meaningful advances in sorting technology for the used packaging materials that are generated. It's critical that we generate homogeneous streams. That just enables better, higher order outcomes every time. We need advances in recycling technology, and I'll dig a little bit further into one that David spoke about as well. And I think that it can't just be one approach either. There is a tendency for the news, the noise, the media to be focused on post-consumer outcomes. But we have a real need for business to business. Packaging moves a lot of products down a supply chain. We tend to see it in the news and media and public only at the last step, post-consumer. And we need different types of recycling. There are different forms out there today, and I'll talk a little bit further about that. But one of the biggest challenges, if we look at it globally, is a significant lack of infrastructure. As we look into developing countries, the collection infrastructure for used materials is non-existent in some cases. And we have a massive challenge in this space with funding that infrastructure. These are key things we need to be thinking about. Recovery of plastic materials, flexible plastics, and containers for that matter, is typically thought of historically around a mechanical recycling system. The idea that we can take a material, we can break it down, and then we can clean it up and turn it back into a new product. And I guess the best example of that is a soft drink bottle. That's, I think, what in most people's minds is recycling of plastics. And for PET soft drink bottles, it's truly effective. It works really well. But many plastics, particularly flexible plastics used in conjunction with food or contaminated, are far more difficult to run through this system. And lay on top of that, food packaging, as David spoke about, has a distinct challenge in that introducing recycled components through traditional methods into direct food contact is heavily challenged. It's not legal. It's probably not safe in many cases. So we need advances in that space. So what I see is there is an emergence of a hierarchy of recycling outcomes based on the sustainable nature of it, the environmental impact, and the real environmental cost of the outcomes. At the top is the kind of Coke bottle for plastics, is the kind of Coke bottle, soft drink bottle model. But now we have an evolution, an evolving development of a chemical recycling, which I think David described as well, where we can take materials, break them down into their primary components, and recreate new materials. And there is also energy recovery as well, where we're getting lower order outcomes, but displacing virgin materials, virgin or non-renewable resources with recovered materials. Now, look, some of these ideas are not optimal, but this hierarchy is not static. Where the infrastructure is created, we can move into one step and get good outcomes, and then we can aspire as technology and infrastructure evolves to move products up this pyramid to get better outcomes, higher order outcomes, and make everything always a better environmental impact. And this is really where I see innovation and drive accelerating dramatically in the packaging industry. Perhaps one of the most influential organizations in flexible plastics is CFLEX. CFLEX stands for a Circular Economy for Flexible Packaging. The drive of this organization is a consortium of large organizations in Europe created it with the aim, the mission of enhancing the performance of flexible packaging further to make it compatible in a circular economy. Their research and their efforts and their reporting, which has come out earlier this year, is actually really useful to us. It's providing the language and the targets for what are expected to be the most likely to be mechanically recovered, recycled, flexible plastics. And today we can see that this is most likely to be in monostructures for polyolefins, polyethylene, or in this part of the world, we might call it traditional bread bags, simple structures. Polypropylene, traditional structures used in perhaps biscuit wrapping and biscuit packets and potato crisps and the like. If we can get those streams separated and simple, there is a good opportunity to recover these mechanically. An advance in this space is testing various material for compatibility with processing like polyethylene. So there is an opportunity to extend the range in this mono space to generate outcomes which we need in fresh produce, for example, where we require either moisture or oxygen sensitive products to be protected. So that is the next area of significant innovation. So the 5 steps to building a circular economy that CFLEX is pushing is, first off, that drive for collection. We need to collect materials and we need to be able to then sort them. As I spoke about earlier, this is infrastructure needs we need in a big way. Then redesigning and innovating in barrier type materials, multi-layer materials, to make them compatible with these simple streams of materials so we can get good recovery outcomes. Then we need to identify solutions and develop the the capabilities for sorting and recycling to make products that are desirable and have evolved, existing, or were able to generate end markets. Perhaps the single biggest missing link in recycling today is demand for the products the recycling system can make. And every organization needs to think about this. For a long time, we have continued to push materials towards a recovery industry without thinking about how can we equally take as much back. And I think this is where commitments to recycled content and materials is extremely important. And I want to pick up a particular technology that's helping in that space in flexibles today. So a large retailer in the UK, Tesco, started collecting flexible plastics. And they found that consumers were keen to recycle these materials, keen to take them back to store at much higher rates than they first expected. So what happens when they collected this material? We generated a program where those materials were taken back to an organization called Plastic Energy, where they were able to chemically recycle through an advanced recycling program, break down all of that mixed, commingled, and potentially contaminated in many ways food packaging, and turn it into a material that could then be fed back into the primary resin generating organizations, the petrochem industry, in this case SABIC, to generate brand new resins that our company, Sealed Air, could then in turn build into new packaging, which was supplied to Bradbury's Cheese, and Bradbury's wrapped new products to put on Tesco's shelves. Not a large scale initially, but an amazing demonstration of a very challenging system and how it can be made circular. So I wanted to talk specifically here about a particular concept that needs to underpin this process and will be something we hear much more about as we go forward. The idea of mass balance certifying circular resins. The nature of that cycle I just described is that it is not simple to take a single molecule and follow it all the way through the path. In many ways, this is a lot like green energy. You know, when we pay for carbon offset programs or pay for green energy, we're doing a good thing for the world. We're building better environmental outcomes and creating green energy. But we can't tell that the exact electron that came out of the plug and is powering my lighting in this office today is the green energy I paid for. That's accounted for by taking accounts, building certificates, and accounting for the investment in the green energy, offsetting through the system and generating credits that I can use to power my household. In many ways, it's a kind of scenario we're used to. This is a similar kind of concept. We're creating renewable resource, raw materials that can feed into the resin generating industry and produce new resins. By the sheer scale of that industry, we need to blend it in and we cannot just batch process it. So that means that we're needing a system, a mass balance system, to account for the fact that we are doing the right things. We are generating materials, we're generating new recycled resins, and we're using them effectively. This form of advanced recycling, I think, will accelerate dramatically because it can take care of critical packaging that we need for the food industry, high performance packaging that's thin technology and flexible, but contaminated and difficult for us to reuse back into itself without this methodology. It is not going to replace mechanical recycling. In fact, by cleaning up the more difficult to recycled materials, it will likely generate more clean, homogeneous streams that mechanical recycling can take and generate better outcomes, just like we see with soft drink bottles and water bottles today. So without spending too much time, you know, the idea is that we are creating new resins, but that we are just not able to do it like turning one plastic bag by washing and grinding that particular bag back into a new bag that way. it's true end-to-end recovery from the consumer all the way back to the petrochem industry that builds the resins that Sealed Air uses. So mass balance is going to be a key topic in this space moving forward. Effectively, the resins generated through the system are exactly the same in performance as what we would class as virgin resin performance. And that is actually the key to it, because if we're going to be circular in high performance food packaging, we need that technology. And I think with that, I might hand it back to Ralph and see if we've got a bit of time left for some questions.
We certainly do, Alan. Thank you so much for that. And I'd invite each of the presenters to come off mute and turn on their video for the purposes of addressing the questions we've got in our remaining time zone here. David, there's in fact two questions at the top of the list there, and they're both addressed to you. So you take the prize for the night. I just haven't figured out what that prize is just yet. But maybe it's an edible cup, because Zam has asked the question, is the edible cup really edible with no side effects? I found it. Have you tried it?
So it's a really good question. I have not tried that myself. It's one of the claims that the company is making. Looking at utilizing seaweed and kelp, for example, to create new polymers. I think what they are really focused on is to make sure that, the polymer that they create is totally biodegradable afterwards. I think that's mainly their main focus. But what they're saying, though, is that because of the food items like seaweed that could actually be eaten, because, that's where it comes from, that's part of its makeup in terms of raw material, then it's edible. But no, I have not tried that myself.
In my view, I think there's a number of those collagen type based materials coming out now. In my view, I think I want to be, yes, they can be eaten, but I think I want to be eating something else with them to make them that much more palatable to make the finish of the dish. There's another question for you. And it's a little bit more scientific this time. What is Tupperware doing to overcome the perception threat for plastics, where there are questions being continuously raised about the leaching into food and also sustainable comparisons with, say, glass or paper? So there's a couple of parts to that question.
Sure. People are... people make choices based on their beliefs, and at Tupperware, we always believe that the consumer is always right, so we don't challenge them. The important thing for us is to make sure that everyone is comfortable to utilize our product. So we have taken steps, like, for example, we don't utilize materials that have BPA in them anymore, because, this is one of the, or has been one of the key issues with regards to bisphenol A, in certain materials like polycarbonate, for example. So we've made the transition. There's a different, there are a number of different materials that we could use as an equivalent. But it's an emotional topic because I think that from a purely scientific point of view, I feel that based on the studies, the material is safe for being in direct contact with food, but I'm not going to challenge anyone who believes otherwise. The important thing is that they need to feel comfortable with the product, if they're going to be making the purchase, and we have to make sure that everything is safe in their minds as well. I think that plastics has always had this reputation. A lot of the things that you hear these days that are very concerning is not only the issue of estrogenic content in plastics, for example, but it's also all of the microplastics, right, that are going into the oceans. I saw an article recently that said that children were consuming a lot of microplastics just in the milk that they're drinking as well. So I think that plastics has some has some focus, to make sure that the message is positive, that if you use plastics in the right way, then there is a huge consumer benefit. And if you talk about traditional materials, definitely, glass and what have you, I mean, they're great materials as well. In fact, if you look at that industry today, that industry is totally different than, the glass of 1,000 years ago, for example.
Oh yeah.
Even ceramics as well, they're now highly engineered. There's glass that almost doesn't break. I think that depending on the use and depending on what people are looking for in terms of, the outcome and in terms of the user experience, all of these would be good materials.
I'd just challenge the rest of the panels to jump into this topic, because yes, you focused on plastics in your answer because that's what the question asked you for. But my view across all is, while we will strive for recycled content at every opportunity to continue things circularity, certainly from a food industry point of view, and I think you could clearly attach pharmaceuticals to this, nobody really is ever going to compromise on food or pharmaceutical safety factors. And that must always be our very first task, is to provide safe food and safe pharmaceuticals for the community. And hopefully do a fine job with the recycling content as well, would be my view on that topic. Any other views from the panel on that particularly interesting question from Hitesh? Okay. Alan, there's one here for you from the same person. How do we address the certification requirements for food safety while using recycled packaging material? So he's kind of put another spin on the same sort of question, but an excellent question. Thank you for it, Hitesh.
Yeah, excellent. And I think it's very much linked to the same kind of answers that we've been just talking to. The business of certifying materials for food contact is extremely well developed and sophisticated, because it's probably one of our most basic needs, safe food, and so packaging's interaction with food has been tested and is continually evolving as a testing science, and there are major credible standards that everyone needs to adhere to. So speaking from our company's perspective, we are unable to market, trial, or put anything out, even test, without it running through our compliance division, which means we're meeting food contact compliance law and testing protocols in the markets that it's going to go in, and as a minimum, US FDA and EU standards. So I see that the recycled content doesn't change that. In many ways, there is actually extra layers of protection, because in a number of countries, law currently states that recycled content cannot be introduced into direct food contact. That said, we can look also at history and precedent. I mentioned soft drink bottles probably too many times today already, but they have had high degrees of recycled content for decades. So it can be done effectively and safely.
Thank you. The safety is the key. Pippa, there's one question here I'd like to address to you, and then with the limited time, Antero, I'll give you the last question after that. Pippa, there's one here I think is for you. Will the price of environmental conserving materials cost less than plastic materials in the future?
Yes, very interesting. And it's a conversation.
Crystal ball job, that one.
Conversation that always comes up. So I think with the context of this question, there isn't a blanket solution. I think this really comes down to the context of how and where that packaging component is being used. Demand's obviously going to play a critical role in this, and how we can really increase the demand for these resources, which will come, I think, through consumer pressure on brands and businesses. But also there's a lot of legislation that's changing that are pushing brands into a more considered and responsible space. I guess, the one kind of caveat with this is it needs proof and it needs quantifiable data. There's a vast array of really incredible innovative materials or bio-based materials that are coming now in place of packaging, but we need to make sure that they are actually of an improved environmental benefits when we're taking the whole system of that packaging's use into play. And again, back to a point that I think I raised earlier, that we need to have an infrastructure in play that really efficiently processes those materials, and that there's a secondary market that's we've got value to reuse or repurpose those materials elsewhere. I think without those components, it's we could be doomed for another plastic pandemic in the future, which we obviously don't want. So yeah, think of the system, but I think have that quantifiable data to assess its certainty.
Thank you, Pippa. And very briefly, Antero, one question for you. What kind of future do you see for plastics in packaging?
I see a great future. I simply think that we cannot live without plastics. I am a forester by education, and I've been working with the forest industry for decades, which is very understandable when you look at Finland. There's nothing much more than forest in the country. But still, I think that plastics have been created to respond to needs that we have, and we simply cannot live without them. And it wouldn't make any sense to try to live without plastics. All right.
Okay, thank you. That's an excellent conclusion to the night. I'd like to thank all of the panelists one more time. Look, we promised the audience circular and sustainable design packaging for the future, and you guys delivered it fantastically. Thank you. For any of the questions that came up there that we can't answer due to running out of time, they will be answered offline. And I would look forward to the fourth in this series of Global Packaging Forum panels. Tomorrow evening, we're really going further into reusable and refillable packaging designs for the future. I think in Pippa's presentation, she certainly touched on it. David certainly has mentioned it in his. It's really a challenging topic, and I really do look forward to seeing all of you, ladies and gentlemen, participating tomorrow afternoon, 3 p.m. Bangkok time, and get your questions ready, ladies and gentlemen. We really look forward to having you. All right, I'd like to hand back to the Informa team to close the night out. And for those of you, please, there's still the online ProPack Asia exhibition to be enjoyed. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And to the panelists, a fantastic job one more time. Thank you. Back to you, Informa.
Thank you.